On today's show, we are going to talk about backdoor stacks, aka sneaky stacks, aka later round stacks in best ball, ones that we think people are overlooking. We're going to rank them from 9 to 1 in terms of how strong we think they are, closing with our favorite. I think everyone listening to this is aware that stacking is massively plus EV in best ball. Even in the smaller field, best ball tournaments that I like to play, I want all my quarterbacks stacked. We're making correlated bets. We're limiting the number of things we need to get right. And we're also giving ourselves outsized upside each week through stacking. Now, what we mean by backdoor stacks are not the primary one, not Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, not Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman, not Mahomes, Kelsey. And an example of a backdoor stack from last year where honestly, most of my profits came from was simply being on Matthew Stafford. I liked Matthew Stafford, especially on DraftKings with a 300-yard bonus relative to where he was going, which was, I think, the 12th, 13th, 14th round, if I recall correctly. I also had a big Cam Akers fade on, and we had the Cooper Kupp injury rumors. So backdoor into Stafford, Kyren Williams, Tutu Atwell, Puka Nacua a bunch, and my three best ball teams all year were all part of that Stafford stuff. So I think the key is having a quarterback with upside available to you a little bit later, and also viable players later that also have upside. Herzig, anything else you want to say about stacking generally and or how you think about backdoor stacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes sense from hey, why am I doing it? We know the DFS side of things. And when I break down from like a tournament wise for best ball, it helps us advance in the regular season because when a team does well, we get multiple pieces from that offense. And then when we get to the playoffs in a more DFS style contest, we get correlation within that game, we get increased upside. And so that's why we want to stack with these backdoors. The way I think about it is when I go into drafts, like obviously I want to get the better, quarterbacks and get their best players, but a lot of the time you just kind of get unlucky. Maybe someone snipes you. You thought you were going one way, you got to veer the other. So later on in the drafts, I always want to know that, hey, if all else goes to kind of shit, I've always got this as my backdoor stack. And that's what today is really about, is when all else kind of doesn't work out, but you still want to make sure you get those kind of correlated stacks. Here's where we can kind of figure out by the end of the draft what's still there.
Leonard, I know you looked a lot about stacking in the Best Ball Manifesto for Best Ball Mania a couple years ago. Anything you want to add about backdoor stacks specifically?
Yeah, I think targeting some uncertain wide receiver rooms makes a lot of sense, where no one really knows what the depth chart order is going to be. As a result, all of these guys are cheap, but there's a good chance like one or two of them are pretty underpriced, especially if the offense really goes off is something we want to look at. But Herzig pretty much hit it. It just helps you in every aspect of best ball. And, one of the big differences from DFS that makes it even more powerful in a weird way than in DFS is the best ball scoring enables you to get the upside of the stacking without sort of like the downside of the correlation, because you can use scores from other players. If, you just get like an alpha game from Jamar Chase and T Higgins doesn't go off in your double stack. Obviously that's an early stack, but just as an example of why that correlation is so powerful because of the best ball scoring.
And in the playoffs, let's say that you have Burrow, Chase, T Higgins. And in the first week of the playoffs, Burrow and Chase go off, but T is awful. You eliminate a lot of the T teams, and then hopefully the next week it's Burrow and T that goes off that allows you to advance. I want to ask a couple quick questions here. I think that backdoors can be minis, right? Like ideally, I like having doubles and triples with my primary stacks because of what the concept we just talked about. But minis, just a simple quarterback pass catcher late, doesn't have to be a double or triple. I think that's viable. And then the other thing that I want to ask about is like scrambling versus getting sniped. So let's say you take Josh Allen early, you don't get James Cook, you don't get Keon Coleman, you don't get Dalton Kincaid. I don't love that, but you can still save it with something like Curtis Samuel or Shakir or Ray Davis or Knox. So yeah, Herzig, any thoughts about sizing when you're backdoor stacking, and then the backdoor with scrambling?
Yeah, for me, it's less about the number of people in the stack and more about the draft capital. So we talk about the Bengals. For the Bengals, if I'm going to be drafting Jamar Chase, T Higgins, and then Joe Burrow, I'm less likely to invest the capital in, Yoshi or Burton later on. But if it's an example where like, hey, we don't know who the top wide receivers are, we're not investing any early rounds. Let's say you get to the Patriots. there are so many Patriots that are all draftable that we really don't know between the two rookies, between Demario Douglas, between Kendrick Bourne. Like, if you wanted to, you missed out on all the early stuff and you wanted to go with Drake May and 3 or 4 of those wide receivers, you're not even spending a top like 14 round pick. And you're now really hitting in a situation that Drake May does outperform his expectations, either in a season or 1 game sample. You at least have a lot of pieces of that, a lot of bites of that, a lot of pieces of it, and at a very cheap cost.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts about sizing with backdoor stacks, Leone, but then also I mentioned the Bills stuff. Do you ever go into a draft and be like, hey, listen, I'm going to get Josh Allen, but I'm actually going to backdoor all of the pass catchers? You know what I mean?
I'm somewhat stubborn where I like to take the value where I can get it and make the draft work as it goes on. Like, there's obviously some instances where I know in certain pockets of the draft, guys are going to be available and I might plan a little bit around that. But for the most part, like, a good way for my teams to get unique and have a lot of upside is to actually just take like that value early, draft smartly, consider the capital, like Herzig said, and then figure it out as I go throughout the draft and not press. And especially if you're playing a team in Best Ball Mania 5, like, you want to build a super team. And the best way to do that is to not go in and set yourself up in a position where you have to take guys ahead of ADP because that's your plan to build a certain stack. The best way to build a super team is to give yourself a lot of outs, know what those outs are throughout the draft, and then maybe you can complete like a really good stack at or after ADP. And that's when, you start having these teams that have a serious amount of upside.
All right. Anything else, Herzig, before we get to the backdoor stack rankings here?
Yeah, the last thing I would add is let's compare Josh Allen to Jalen Hurts. If Devontae Smith, if AJ Brown go, and you now draft Jalen Hurts, you really don't have too many of these backdoor kind of pairings available. Maybe Dallas Goedert, maybe you go crazy off the board at the end. But someone like Josh Allen, if you're between those two, you know that with Josh Allen, you still have a lot of other pieces that you can hit. So that's where I'm more likely to say, hey, even if I like Jalen Hurts better, I'm going to go Josh Allen because I can get these late stack partners.
100%. And I've done that already, even though we have Hurts slightly ahead of Josh Allen in our rankings. Sometimes it gets to me on the clock in round 3. I have my choice between both of them. I'm like, well, Devontae and AJ Brown are already gone. What am I going to do with Jalen Hurts? I got to take Josh Allen there and try to build out a stack that way. All right. We're going to rank our favorite backdoor stacks here from 9 to 1. Let's start with 9 and one that I actually haven't done. Leone submitted this one to the group. I actually haven't done this one yet, Leone. Maybe I'm a coward. It is the Carolina Panthers. Now, Xavier Legette goes around 139 overall. Adam Thielen, we actually have a pretty good position on above market. He goes around 165. We have him ranked a few rounds higher than that. Beyond that, though, I mean, Jatavian Sanders is free. Bryce Young is basically free. It's a thinnish bet to me, but it's certainly very cheap. Leone, talk to the people why you are on or why you've taken some Carolina stacks so far backdoor.
Yeah, I mean, part of this comes down to price. And when we were setting up for this podcast, I wanted to look at what I've actually done because there's some stacks that look more fun than others, but like trying to look at what you can practically do. And I've gotten stuck in a draft where I've taken like Deontay Johnson, who's a pretty good target earner in the 8th round, which is like a really good price tag. And then, as you mentioned, like Legette and Thielen, you get those guys, what's that, around like 13 to 14. And at that point, if you are hurting for a stack and you've got sniped, it's not too hard to just build an easy single or a double with Bryce Young. I haven't done it with Jatavian Sanders for free in the 18th round as a rookie tight end. It's something that I want to look into a little bit more. We don't have a good ranking on him, but you've got 2 target earners in Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. I think it's going to be hard for both those guys to hit value, but I think one of them can. And then like, it's just, we want to make bets on rookies and we're willing to reach a little bit on rookies. We've seen, even the lesser known rookies really change best ball and how teams have performed, not just last year with Tank Dell and Puka Nacua, but going back to like T. Higgins and Chase Claypool. Those guys were like really late round picks, several years ago. So that's part of the reason I like the Carolina stack. And to your point, Adam, you don't have to like onslaught your 3rd stack, and some of the numbers I've looked at when I did the Best Ball Manifesto last year and re-upping for this year, your QB 1 and 2, if you take them a bit earlier, it's nice to have some bigger stacks if you can, maybe get to 4 to 5 guys on the team total, including the quarterback. But once you get to the 3rd stack, like that offense, the expectations aren't as high, and it's reasonable to just kind of do 1 or 2 stack partners and not use too many of your roster spots on an offense that probably doesn't have a huge amount of upside. We're just looking for them to beat value.
Right. So I think on this Panthers one specifically, I prefer it on DraftKings more. I have more rounds to work with, so I have more room to take a dusty third quarterback like Bryce Young, and then also I just have more roster spots to play with. I can easier to take a flyer on Jatavian Sanders on DraftKings as your third tight end than would be on Underdog, where I not typically, but I don't love having 3 tight end and 3 quarterback on Underdog. Herzig, any thoughts on Panthers stack before we move on?
Yeah, I think the other thing we'll just mention is the Dave Canales edition. Like for people who are fearful of, well, the Panthers were just so bad last year. Yes, they were, but also you've got, I mean, the QB whisper we saw with Geno Smith, we saw with Baker. So there is some hope there to at least like think maybe there's some optimism for the passing game.
All right. Our number 8 backdoor stack here is Jets. Now, Breece and Garrett Wilson are going to go very early. I mean, Breece is for sure our first round pick. Garrett Wilson, I personally like at the 1-2 turn a lot. But you can still consider it a backdoor of maybe one of those guys. And then Aaron Rodgers goes late. Malachi Corley goes late. Tyler Conklin goes late. But even if you just get one of those guys, you can set up some nice backdoor stacks. Herzig, what do you think about Jets as a backdoor stack this year?
Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about backdoor stacks, I'm also often trying to, get that quarterback specifically on the quarterback and tight end specifically on Underdog, because it is so much more about getting those touchdowns. And we see higher correlation between QBs and pass catchers when we are talking touchdowns. So someone like Tyler Conklin, Aaron Rodgers, and the truth is like no one really likes drafting those guys. There's a reason why we see their kind of ADPs fall so much. And even the Garrett Wilson drafters like aren't fighting to go grab Aaron Rodgers. So it's a weird thing with an ADP, but there are like wider range of outcomes for various players. And we see that Aaron Rodgers is one of those with a wider range of outcomes, which means you can have a better chance of getting substantial value as he falls and still get that kind of, late pairing partners.
Yeah. And one thing, Leone, I like to think about with these backdoor stacks is like touchdown scoring tight ends on Underdog. Touchdowns are everything. And so if you can hit on like Tyler Conklin scoring 8 touchdowns this year from Rodgers is well within the range, right? So any thoughts on Jets backdoors this year, Leone?
Yeah, I just know, a common theme, which is like cheap rookie wide receiver with a lot of these stacks that we can take chance on. You'll see some more of that as we go throughout the podcast. I will say, as far as like this cheaper, quarterback and tight end, I have done some 3 quarterback, 3 tight end teams early. I like doing those earlier in the offseason when the running back wide receiver bets in rounds 14 to 18 are a little bit shakier. Like those guys are more likely to be complete zeros. So I'm with you, Adam, that normally I don't like to do that. But if I'm going to do that, it's probably early in the drafting season where I can take tight ends and quarterbacks that I feel pretty comfortable are the starters in those rounds 15 to 18 and just invest more premium capital into running back and wide receiver earlier.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Number 7 backdoor stack we have is the Tennessee Titans. Now, Calvin Ridley goes around 66 overall. We're behind him. We're behind market on him. DeAndre Hopkins goes 83rd overall. We're a bit ahead market on him. The running back room I'm interested in. Like even in non-Titan stacks, I take Pollard and Spears reasonably because I have so many hero and zero RB teams. The key, though, I think to this one, Leone, is getting Chig in there for what we talked about with the backdoor tight end touchdown upside for Chig. Chig was so underwhelming last year, so it scares me a little bit. I don't think I've done it too often this year, but yeah. Any thoughts on Titans backdoors, Leone?
Yeah, I'm scared on the volume earning potential for Chig, absolutely. But I do think if you're taking a late round tight end, a guy with athletic upside who's in like year 4 or 5, sometimes these guys just take a little bit of time. It makes a ton of sense. And as you said, the touchdown potential is there. So it's very easy to get Levis and Chig late. And then, I'm not so sure how I feel about Boyd and Burks now until maybe Burks gets moved. It sounds like they're going to keep him, but you never know if that's just the team blustering to build up the trade value. But to your point, Adam, like between the running backs, Hopkins and Ridley, like there's a very good chance that you can end up with one of those guys early. And that's when you get sniped somewhere else. Okay, I can quickly turn this into a double stack just using round 16 and 17, going Levis and Chig late.
Yeah. This one, Herzig, like it's not expensive, right? Like Leone said, I mean, even Ridley and Hopkins aren't expensive. The running backs aren't expensive. I think what people are saying, and I've heard you say this, is that it's hard to find real upside scenarios for the Titans. So, Herzig, what do you think about Titans stuff so far?
Yeah, it's not one of my favorites from like an actual, I don't know, team personnel. But what it is attractive is the players that you're stacking with are in the right pockets of the draft where we want to be drafting that position. So DeAndre Hopkins is right at the end of the wide receiver cliff, so I'm grabbing him. Pollard and Tajay are both in that kind of, hey, here are the running backs in those rounds like 8 to 11 where I want to be grabbing running backs. So I often just end up with one or two pieces of the Titans just because of that's where I'm drafting those positions. And if I need that backdoor, that's where, hey, I know I can get Levis or the Chig later on. So it does work. But yeah, even though Brian Callahan, sophomore QB, like there are these notes that say, hey, there's a wide range of outcomes for these players for this team. It's hard to just get past my, doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
The thing I want to point out too, like Herzig said with the sophomore QB, a lot of these teams we're targeting, they're late stacks for a reason. You're able to backdoor them for a reason, but we do want these teams with uncertainty. So, the teams we've covered already are like, sophomore QBs with new coaching staffs. We've got the Jets with Aaron Rodgers after he missed a whole season. And we're going to see fresh quarterbacks in new places, on this list as we go through it. So figuring out uncertainty versus just kind of, some of the stacks that have gotten, me in trouble in the past are maybe, I remember like the Washington Ryan Fitzpatrick days where it's kind of like, you sort of know what you're getting into and the guys are cheaper for a more known reason as opposed to now there's at least, as Herzig said, even if you don't feel like you love it, you do have a wider range of outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's go to the number 6 backdoor stack. And I have the Rams here at number 6. Now, this one is difficult because I think you do want one of Puka or Kyren here with it. But you don't have to be loaded up on those guys because Blake Corum, Demarcus Robinson, Matthew Stafford all go pretty late. So I wouldn't call this like a classic backdoor stack. But once again, the way that Sean McVay plays, we know exactly who's going to be on the field at almost all times. And like, I think Stafford and Demarcus Robinson are too cheap. Anyways, I believe we're a bit ahead of market on Puka also here. So I wouldn't call it a classic backdoor stack, Herzig, but I do think that there's upside in the Rams with one of those star pieces and then taking some shots on other guys like Corum or Demarcus Robinson late. Herzig, how you been handling Rams so far?
Yeah, I would just say it's a stack that I like because, I definitely want either Puka or Cooper. And when I grab either of those, I'm immediately thinking like, hey, there's a chance that I'm going to grab Stafford. He's going in that like 130s, 140s range. And like, that's a good place to grab a second QB. And I think, Kyren's completely fine too. I actually don't love the Stafford Kyren kind of combination because you think of Stafford as being that pocket, that pocket presence. He's going to be scoring when he's throwing passing touchdowns. He's not doing anything on the ground. Then you think of Kyren, who's more of a volume running back. So across the season they could correlate, but in a one game, these are two guys that I really don't love together. But if I get Puka, Cooper, those are ones that I definitely want to stack with Stafford.
I'm curious what you think about that, Leone. I know we've done work on the DFS side about playing running back and quarterback together. What do you think about things like Kyren and Stafford together?
I think I like it a little bit more than Herzig. Kyren had 48 targets in 12 games last year, caught 3 receiving touchdowns. So I think there is some upside. They run those screen passes by the goal line. And, I kind of think in best ball too, you get some of the benefits of the direct correlation. Like hopefully you get that receiving touchdown, but I think there's some benefit in like the yo-yo effect where like 1 week it's Stafford and then 1 week it's Kyren, and it actually like helps you on the floor side a little bit too. Or another part with the Ram stack, if you're taking a shot on one of the tight ends late, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but Davis Allen, Kobe Parkinson, where our current ownership estimates have those guys at like 10%. So obviously the Higbee thing with the injury there and when he's coming back makes it tough to figure out what it's gonna be like at the end of the year. But do want to point out that, we're considering ownership a little bit, probably more when we get into August and those have solidified more and we know roles, but it is something that caught my eyes. We were talking about this stack.
Yeah, and if you go to our underdog rankings, you'll see something called current ownership estimate. Basically what we're trying to see here is how often our guys drafted. Because if you get to the Best Ball Mania playoffs and you have a guy who wasn't drafted in every league and he goes off, that is a huge, huge, huge advantage. As for tight end specifically, I don't know how you've thought about this, Herzig. I actually think Davis Allen can play. And to me, he's like the uncertainty guy. But Colby Parkinson, I think we know what he is, and it's not great, but he's going a little bit earlier. I haven't taken either of these guys. Herzig, have you?
Before the Colby Parkinson signing, I was drafting a bunch of Davis Allen. Like, he was literally my top tight end drafted in the Big Bowl, which is the contest before the NFL draft actually happens. But then they signed Colby Parkinson, and I just completely slowed that down because the amount of money that they gave Colby, like, that's really scary. And then you think that, hey, Ann Higbee might be back for the actual fantasy playoffs, so that's challenging. But completely agree with Leone that, hey, come August, when we get a better idea from the preseason, from reports, like who's going to be that actual pass catching tight end, and they're still at that 10%, that's when I'd be willing to kind of hammer one of those two.
All right. Number 5 is one that I submitted to our list here, and that is the Washington Commanders. Now, this is a bit of a different one because it revolves around Jayden Daniels. And to me, the way Jayden Daniels hits, and I think Jayden Daniels has a huge range of outcomes this year. To me, the way he hits is if he goes full Lamar running. And, there's some tape bros and some scout bros who say that's not possible. He's not like Lamar as a runner. There's other tape bros who say, yes, this guy can run like Lamar. He can have a 1,000 rush yard season. And so these kind of quarterbacks in fantasy who can run for 1,000 yards, maybe it only happens 5% of the time, but who can, I'm happy single stacking them. And so if I get into spots where all my quarterback stacks early get sniped and I have to go to Jayden Daniels, I can backdoor Jayden Daniels goes around 105, Jahan Dotson 131, Ben Sinnott 149, Luke McCaffrey 176. There are a lot of options to single stack with Jayden Daniels or double if you want to. But to me, again, the bet on this one is different because it's a bet on Jayden Daniels going full Lamar with his legs. So I actually like this one probably more than it sounds like Herzig or Leone do. But yeah, Herzig, why don't you talk about this one? Because I've gotten in a few spots where I get sniped, I'm on massive tilt, and I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Let me just get the Commander stack here.
Yeah, no, we are starting to get to the point where, like, I actually do like these backdoor stacks a decent amount. And I think that's a perfect example. We know that the upside is going to be there for Jayden Daniels. And you only need, as you said, one, and there's so many of these late ones. We have that Dotson, we have the Sinnott, we have the McCaffrey. And so when all I need is, hey, a rushing QB who has weekly upside and maybe is actually going to, either give us more on the ground or give us a little more in the air to give a successful offense. And yes, you just need kind of one guy to really hit with him. I like this, where these are the ones I'm starting to get excited about.
Yeah. Leone, we've talked in projections a bunch about how to project Jayden Daniels rushing. We can't say that he's Lamar. We also can't say that he won't run very much at all. We've tried to kind of balance it a little bit. It's like, I don't know how we can do this in projection. I know we have ceiling outcome baked in, but to me, his ceiling is maybe bigger than we're giving it credit for. And that's just my opinion personally. But yeah, Leone, how do you think about Commander stuff?
Yeah, I think what's hard with the ceiling stuff is capturing, like, there's different layers to ceiling, and we kind of have like a single ceiling, but like the max upside for Jayden Daniels is going to be a lot better than some of these guys. And it's something we're looking into tweaking. It's a difficult stack to get with our ranks right now. We're a little bit behind because there's so much rookie fever, at least on Underdog specifically. So we're pretty close to even on ADP on Jayden Daniels, but then with Sinnott, Luke McCaffrey, those rookies were like well behind. It's easier to stack with Dotson. I will say, when you're drafting, like, you always want to understand the complexion of your team. And if you've got a team where the first 10 rounds, you've got a lot of like stable veterans and you feel pretty good, like, that's when I'll start to reach for some of the upside and the rookies and stuff, just knowing that, over the entire complexion of your roster, you want to mix these upside guys with these safe guys. And I think you can eat some value losses and take that upside on Washington at those points. And with Sinnott in particular, it's getting tougher. He's going tight end 17. But if I'm in builds where I know I'm drafting 3 tight ends late, I'll take Sinnott earlier than first out of those 3 tight ends to get that upside, understanding that I'm reaching on value, but knowing I can get some guys like Juwan Johnson and, some other, maybe even Hunter Henry, like after Sinnott, who are a little bit more stable and a little bit more gettable. So keep that in mind. And honestly, I'm fine. I know this is a stacking show, but I'm fine taking Jayden Daniels. If he's part of a 3 QB build, I'd be okay playing him naked even in these tournaments.
Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned some boring tight ends like to pair with Sinat. I've been taking um Noah Fant, Juwan
Yeah.
Johnson, Chig a little bit, and there was one more. Oh,
Was
and
Conklin and then
Musgrave. So yeah, it's kind of the boring tight end options. All right. Let's go to our number 4 backdoor stack here. Now, this is one that both Leone and Herzig submitted and one that I have not done. So I'm interested to hear on this one. It is the New England Patriots. One of the reasons I think I haven't done it is because I actually do think Jacoby Brissett's going to start week 1 for the Patriots. I also don't have a strong feeling about any of their weapons. I don't feel great about Jalen Polk or Baker or Pop Douglas or Kendrick Bourne. And I actually do take Antonio Gibson a decent amount in hero or zero RB builds. Leone, I know what he's going to say. He's going to tell me that the uncertainty here is good, and that's what we want. And that is why they are so cheap. But Herzig, you also submitted the Patriots stack. Go ahead on why you like this one.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said is the reason why these guys are so cheap. Like, this is probably my favorite. Oh, crap, I need to build a late stack team. As the first pass catcher is literally going at pick 155, and the QB's down to 198. And like Drake May, way too cheap with people being scared off of, how much he's going to play. Is he going to start? But when he plays, he was number 3 overall pick. Like, he is going to play. When he plays, he'll far surpass his ADP on a per game basis. I don't think people are really like accounting for how much he actually runs. Like, if you just take his rushing production from college, he averaged 8 points for a game of fantasy points of rushing. And compare that, Anthony Richardson was 10, Justin Fields was 8, Deshaun Watson was 8. Like, this guy does it on the ground. We can expect that in the pros too. And we're getting this in the near end of the draft. And now, when I also, at a point that I'm like, oh crap, I need pass catchers, all 4 of them, even 5, if you really want to get crazy, to take on Thornton or whatever, or Hunter Henry as well, are all available there. So it's just so easy. And yeah, I mean, what if Drake May does actually play earlier on, week 1, week 2, week 3? Like, I don't know. It doesn't even matter when you're getting a QB that late and you'll be able to get his entire stack partners with like extremely low draft capital.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on the per game Drake May projection smashing his ADP due to the rushing. I think that makes sense. Leone, any thoughts on Patriots backdoors here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these rookie quarterbacks always end up playing earlier than we're worried about. I shouldn't say always, but a lot of the times. And in best ball, you likely can survive, a handful of weeks. You're not going to die, especially with the playoff format on DraftKings and Underdog. The other thing, like, I think having lots of outs is low key big too. Like, if you pivot to some of these other late round stacks and you're deciding like, do I take, Will Levis or Chig first, and you get sniped on one of them and you're kind of toast unless maybe you took like Hopkins or something early. Here, you can just go with what falls. It's also 2 of the rookie wide receivers that are in spots where the depth charts are crowded, but not like great competition, and they're surprisingly well priced. I think people are pushing up some of the other rookies really, really heavily. Polk and Javon Baker have pretty favorable tags, like not too hard if you want to get some of your rookie wide receiver exposure.
All right, let's go to the number 3 backdoor stack that we have here, and it's the Falcons. And I kind of think of this one similar to the way I thought about the Rams. One of Bijan, London, early ideally, and maybe even Pitts. But then you can get Cousins goes very late, and Darnell Mooney goes late, and Tyler Algier goes late. And Rondale Moore is a guy that I've been taking a bunch late. Now, I think my question on this one to you, Herzig, is if we don't get Bijan London, can we still go backdoor with Cousins? In other words, Cousins Mooney or Cousins Rondale Moore as an emergency stack. I know it's not ideal, but I've done that a couple times. Break glass in case of emergency. Any thoughts on Falcons and exactly how you would be stacking them?
I would say Pitts I'd include. And so a lot of times in my early wide receivers, I look and let's say I went with Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. And then in the third, I also am grabbing Tank Dell, but I'm not going to be able to get Stroud. So like I'm in a situation where I look at my wide receiver room and I like them, but I don't love the stack partners. That's one where it's like, you know what? I'm going to make sure I get Kyle Pitts here, and then I can grab the Kirk Cousins, because I do like Kirk Cousins as a QB better than I'm liking the Gardner Minshew or the Rodgers. And so that's where, yeah, I'm okay if you miss out on Bijan, if you miss out on London, still stacking, because you give me Kyle Pitts, you give me Kirk Cousins, and you give me maybe it's Algier, maybe the Rondale Moore, like that's a pretty solid stack. And you're just saying it's not going to happen through like their key, very expensive guys, or it's going to happen enough that I'm getting okay production with those later value assets.
Yeah, we talked about Rondale on the Silva pod last week. Hopefully you guys listen to that. Rondale Moore's, I don't know if he's good, but he's going to be on the field, I think, a bunch for a team that's going to play 11 personnel a ton and does not have a ton of depth. I don't know, Leone, like, I've maybe been doing this too much without Drake London or Pitts, but what do you think about Falcon stacks?
Yeah, I mean, we're ahead of ADP on every player on the Falcons. So I think investing in this offense any way you can makes sense. I don't think, the market has certainly adjusted, but I don't know if they fully adjusted to how different this offense is probably going to look. You're not only going from Arthur Smith to a new OC, but the quarterback switch, going from quarterbacks that are inaccurate and scramble and take sacks to Kirk Cousins, who's not going to scramble or take a lot of sacks, very accurate quarterback. The pass volume switch is just going to be absolutely massive. I mean, it's hard to see this really paying off in a playoff scenario without Pitts or London, but at the same time, the chaos of the NFL season, Drake London gets hurt, and you've got Mooney and Rondale at a really cheap stack, like that's going to look really, really good. You're not counting on that, but I do think it's something that you can say like, okay, these guys are okay values as wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s on Atlanta, not in fantasy, but and then, you just kind of bank maybe a little bit of that contingency upside.
One of the reasons that I like this one is because when Kirk Cousins hits, you know how he hits. He does not hit running the football. He does not hit running touchdowns. He hits by throwing for 400 yards in a game and 4 touchdowns. And so when he hits, it's like it's going to involve Mooney, right? It's going to involve a lot of these guys when he throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns.
One final note, I know Thorman immediately pegged the Week 17 game between Atlanta and Washington as a pace-up game as well. You also get a home game against the Giants in Week 16 for the Falcons.
So I don't even know if it's backdoor, but I do consider priority on teams where I get Drake London or Pitts to get Cousins and then to also get Rondale or Mooney. And I don't mind throwing Algier in there either. All right. Number 2 backdoor stack for the 2024 best ball season, the New Orleans Saints. So you can start this one with Rashid Shaheed, who goes around 120th overall. I like Kendre Miller plenty. He goes around 150. We're way ahead of market on Juwan Johnson. And then Derek Carr. I mean, people have just had it with Derek Carr. He is the QB 27 right now. I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, I don't like Derek Carr in fantasy either, but he is one of the last quarterbacks to go, 198 overall on Derek Carr. And so this is a really easy one to do. And I think it has some pretty decent upside. I could see Kendre Miller. We talked about this with Silva, who has spoken to Underhill. I could see Kendre Miller having a really good role here. And Juwan Johnson, Rashid Shaheed are just solid NFL players, in my opinion. So, Herzig, go ahead on the Saints backdoor, which, again, we have at number 2 overall.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr, he averaged under 15 fantasy points per game last year. Like, we get it. It's not good, but that is why he's going as the QB 27. But there are things that are actually positive. And if you look at specifically how he ended the year in the final 2 out of the final 3 weeks, he finished as QB3 and QB1. And I don't think it's a surprise that, hey, playing in a dome, getting that weather aspect, there were some positive aspects there. And we know that because Derek Carr does have that indoor, he has some weapons at his disposal. Like, there are these these peak outcomes. There are these ceiling potential. And when you're paying virtually nothing for it, like that's why I do like it. If we look at the kind of his schedule too there, you're getting 2 games at home versus Washington, versus Vegas, and then 1 at Green Bay. That'll be a bit difficult, but you can still expect them to be throwing. So I kind of do like it. And Juwan Johnson, one of those tight ends that if you miss out on the first 10, 12 rounds and you need your second or third, he's a great candidate there. We're expecting not to have Jimmy Graham in the end zone stealing those touchdowns. What was it? Something like 7 receptions for 6 touchdowns, something like that last year. It feels like nothing, but maybe extra few of those go to Juwan Johnson. Maybe with a bit more of kind of a different staff in there, you don't have Taysom taking as much of that kind of traditional tight end role. So I do like Juwan Johnson. I like the Derek Carr. It's just so cheap. And also Rashid Shaheed, if you do end up with him, like that still feels like just a great best ball value pick, and highly, highly correlates the way that he plays with the success for Derek Carr.
Oh, Rashid Shaheed is a baller, man. Dude, you can just play. This is, Leone, I think, like the classic definition of a backdoor stack. Like you can get a bunch of these guys very late. Any thoughts on Saints, Leone?
Yeah, you can also get A.T. Perry as like an emergency round 18 dude. I like it. You know, we've got pretty good value on this team overall. Just think there's going to be some regression in terms of like the red zone effectiveness and stuff for New Orleans. There'd be, you know, a bit better offensively than people think. My one concern is just there's a little bit less uncertainty with a lot of these players than there is with some of these other stacks we're talking about, where you might be able to see a wider range of outcomes. And that's something I just want to make sure I don't get too much of it. I definitely want some of it, but I want to be aware that, average value might be a little bit better here than some of the other stacks we're talking about, but the really high end upside might not be quite as strong.
That's a really good point. And it's probably one that I don't think about enough. In other words, what Leone is saying is that we know for sure we have a huge sample on Derek Carr. He will not finish as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy this season. He will not. We know that. However, Drake May could. We don't know. The range of outcomes is really wide. Jaden Daniels could. You know what I mean? And like even Will Levis could. We haven't seen him enough to know for sure. So yeah, I think that's a good point. All right. Drum roll, please, for the number one backdoor stack of the 2024 best ball season. It is the Cleveland Browns. And so what you can do to get this Browns backdoor stack, and first let me just zoom out for a second here. The reason that this works so well to me is because of how late Deshaun Watson is going right now. Before I did any best ball drafts this year, I was like, oh, Deshaun Watson's probably going in like round 11 or 12 or something like that. He has rushing ability. We know he has high-end outcomes. We've seen it in Houston. He is going, let me see, 163rd overall is Deshaun Watson. We have him ranked 137th overall. So that's the key to start it. The other reason I think this is a really good stack is because people are overvaluing when Nick Chubb will be back and how good he will be. I am so worried that Nick Chubb will never be the same and may not be back until very late in this year with yet another knee injury, the same knee that's given him so many problems. So to me, you have mispricings on Deshaun Watson. I think you have mispricings in the backfield with Jerome Ford and Deontay Foreman. And then you have talented guys like Njoku, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore that are all available really late also. So to me, this is like the classic backdoor stack where guys are mispriced, they have a ceiling, and they go really late. So Herzig, anything to add on Cleveland here?
Yeah, I mean, start off with Deshaun Watson. Like, I think he is literally the most mispriced player in best ball right now. He's being drafted as that QB 22. And if you look at his sample from last year, ignore even the stuff from before that, like for his upside size, but just last year, like he wasn't a good quarterback. We know that, but he still finished QB5, QB7, QB10, QB14, and QB27. Like, and he was mostly hurt playing pretty bad football. If you think of this year, I don't think there's a benching risk if you look at the contract and how much they invested. So as long as he stays healthy, I think he's a lock to outperform this ADP with the upside scenarios for smashing it. And Pat Thorman mentioned, like, he's very high on the Browns' play volume. They were 5th in neutral pace for the season last year and 1st in play volume. And they play faster when they have Deshaun Watson as QB. And Leone, I mean, I don't want to steal it from you, but like, I was so excited when you said what you saw earlier. Like, their opponents in the playoffs, like those could be 3 big shootouts. It's Kansas City, it's at Cincinnati, it's Miami. And we saw last year from a week 17 for the best ball people thinking about like, hey, last year, Browns, Jets, we're all scared away from it. I think we're going to see the same thing with the Browns, Dolphins this year. But like, this is a team that overall, I think just the market is mispricing. And I want to get a lot of pieces of.
Go ahead on the Browns, Leone.
Yeah, this is a team too. When you look at all the individuals, it's a lot of guys that are like post-hype guys. Like they've had upside at some point in their careers. We've thought highly of them. Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Njoku, Watson himself. Like, so you get them all together and everyone's kind of given up on like all of these guys, not just Watson. And you could see where like maybe it's not super high probability it all clicks, but if it does, like, it's not insane that Jerry Jeudy is like a 4th round wide receiver next year or something, like those types of things are in the range of outcomes here. So I haven't gotten it yet. I do think if you're drafting like a portfolio of teams, you want to be patient and just know that based on certain drafts, you're going to eventually get some of these, especially with our rankings. The thing you have to be willing to pull the trigger on with Cleveland is potentially taking Watson before you have some of these guys. I guess you'd want to take Judy before Watson, but you do have Elijah Moore and the running backs in like Deonta Foreman, late Jerome Ford, like they're all there in like the double-digit rounds. So just keep that in mind when you're building this stack.
I actually been taking Ford and Foreman as one-offs, like not even part of Brown stacks. You know, I think those guys are interesting. Also, Herzig, I'm not sure if you're aware, the Weather Bros are out. The Weather Bros are already telling me that week 15 in Cleveland, home against Kansas City, it's going to be horrible weather. They're also convinced that on Sunday, December 29th, week 17, home against Miami, is also going to be horrible weather in Cleveland. I can't face the Weather Bros on Sunday morning when we already have a forecast. We have Weather Bros out here on May 16th. Herzig, please tell me we don't need to be thinking about Cleveland weather. And I'm for the dome stuff. I agree there's better spots, but you can't freak out about this in May, can you?
I'm far more likely to provide a boost to ones that I know are in a dome, and then a smaller boost to if they're in Florida or somewhere where there's like really no weather concern, than I am to start dinging the ones that are up in Buffalo, in New York, in Cleveland this early. And we saw it literally last year. Like last year, you had Cleveland the Jets on Thursday night in Cleveland, and we were like, oh, bad weather, shortened week, like this game's going to be nothing. And it turned out there was a huge mini stack that went off in that game. And I think that's going to be a similar situation. Oh, Tua can't play in the cold weather, blah, blah, blah. Like, still doing it. I hope that we get even more value on the Cleveland and the Miami guys as a result.
I was so worried about that Thursday game because I had Breece and Njoku in so many spots. And I was like, and I was like, man, this is a short week, two good defenses, poor weather, and it just goes off. So like Herzig said, really, really good. All right. That is going to do it for part 1 of our 2024 Best Ball series. We'll be back with part 2 soon. Be sure you are subscribed to this podcast feed. It is indeed free. Be sure you subscribe on YouTube. It is indeed free also. And if you're looking for continuously updated rankings, we have an entire team of people looking at our rankings literally every single day to make sure that the ones you upload before your best ball draft are as accurate as they can be. For Leone, for Herzig, for producer Luke, for producer Ryan, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.